Hello again, quarantographers. I know it's been a minute. I took a beard trimmer to my hair because I was just sick of it. Today I have a request for a reverse engineering of light from one Shelby Cooper. Shelby sent me a few pictures from photographer Beth Koeth and asked me how I thought they were done. These are the photos, lovely kind of lifestyle photography, very bright, very beautiful. The thing I noticed that I kind of latched onto that I figured would make an interesting episode was her use of combination ambient light and strobe light. Now, mixing the two of these can be very tricky. You have to make some very difficult decisions as to how real you want the photo to look and how nice you want the photo to look. Often these two are in direct opposition, and you have to kind of dial things in and find the moment that works for you. So I'm going to look at Mary Beth's photos a little bit. I'm going to discuss the hallmarks that I see in there, the things that I'm grabbing onto that are making me think this is how it is lit. And I'm also going to do one of my own examples. I set up a few lights in my living room in the morning when there was light pouring in, and I'm just going to kind of show you through what the process of balancing ambient and flash looks like. Now, I really like doing this. Flash is kind of a superpower, in my opinion. Because of the way it works, you have the ability to adjust ambient separately from flash just by adjusting the shutter speed on your camera. I'll get into that in a minute. But in the meantime, let's head on over to the examples. So here we are with the very first photo. Looks very beautiful, very bright, very natural, but also there are some things drawing my eye here that make me think this has been lit. First thing first, I'm going to notice this big bright line on the baby here. This is telling me we have a very strong kicker. You can see it here in her hair as well, a little bit here. And the idea is that it's a beautiful backlit sunlight, sunset situation. And even this big glowing window here tells me that as an idea. However, it's my opinion, my professional opinion, that this is actually an artificial light. Probably a bare bulb strobe head, fairly far off and above, that has been gelled, fairly warm. I would probably say even a half CTO on this. And it's just shooting in, blasting in through here, deliberately at a power that is a bit outside of the camera's range. Like, it's actually trying to blow out, because if you want it to look natural, a blown out window is actually a great thing that kind of tricks your brain into thinking it is natural light. You also can see it here kind of, in the shadows it's neutral, but where it's kicking out it's a little bit more orange. You also see a little bit of spill here in the window casement and even a little bit here, which seems like it might not be possible, but my guess is it's from the diffusion of the window itself, just kind of spreading this orange outward a little bit. Furthermore, you also see it a little bit in the holes of these lamps. They get really strong on this one, a little bit less on this one, and not at all. Whereas if I had initially looked at these, I might have actually thought that these lamps were on, just as a practical, but the fact that all three are looking very different tells me it's just actually catching this light on the inside. The next hint I'm looking at is the general shape of light on these women's faces. This just kind of comes from experience, but I'm willing to bet it's just a large softbox or a large octabank just off right here, kind of blasting in. Just a nice soft light that's very flattering for people. In my experience, true window light doesn't really look like this. It's just a little too convenient, and that's fine. Sometimes you actually just want to make something look beautiful, and my guess is that was the client request on this. Other things hinting to that, if you look at the shadows cast by these particular bowls here, there's a shadow cast here. All that is kind of suggesting there's a light off to the right. Finally, and this is kind of a guess, and it may not be true because of the way this first flash might be bouncing around the room, there's probably a pretty good possibility that there's another flash here as a fill at a much lower level, just to kind of bring out some of the detail in the shadows of the nose. The other thing kind of leading me in this direction is seeing this kind of secondary shadow off of these shelves here. And it makes me think that there might be another light, kind of one casting this shadow, one casting this shadow. One reason I tend to prefer soft boxes versus octabanks is anytime you have a nice reflective surface in here, you're going to see the shape of it. So, this kind of suggests, hey, there's a little curve to it. It might be an octa. But if you look in here, I don't have a high enough res to really peep on this, but this looks kind of rectangular. This little catch light here. And the fact that I actually only see one catch light here is actually giving lie to the idea of a fill light. So I may nix that idea. Finally, looking at this little area here, I believe that's just a practical light. I think these shelves kind of have some underlighting, some cove lighting that is just causing this very warm light here. But the important thing to keep in mind is that the photographer let in a certain amount of ambient. And the way to kind of do that is to shoot the shot first without any of your flashes on. Get the things you can't control. Think about the outside light to the exposure that you want them to be. In this case, you kind of want outside light to be pretty bright, if not even brighter than your subjects, to give a certain amount of verisimilitude to the image. And then you start adding your other lights to kind of taste. Add a nice bright kicker, add a nice bright key. And then it's really up to you to decide how much of that to add. Whether you want it to be mostly about flattering your subject or mostly about making it look like it was shot purely naturally. We'll work on to the next one. Now this shot is interesting. My initial thought on this was that there was some sort of big source coming off this way. But this light is extremely soft. If there's a really big softbox, that's possible, but I'm actually willing to bet this one's completely natural. We have a very white kitchen, which would reflect all of the light. We have a kind of soft fall off that suggests that the light source is pretty far away in a way you can't necessarily get with an artificial light. And then just looking at how soft the background is, it feels like this might have been shot wide open, f2 or f2.8. And that tells me that there's probably not a flash at play here. You usually end up at smaller apertures when you have flashes like that. The other thing that's kind of cueing me in is just kind of how messy the light color is. And I don't mean that as an insult. Messiness is very much in our brains identified with naturalism. It's one of those things that makes an image look too flashy is when all of the light is one color. Here we have a big window, which could be mostly daylight, but also could be picking up tinges of green from trees or grass or something like that. But then we also have this orange light here that's reflecting off of this practical light. We've got a little bit of coming off of all these surfaces here, a bit of contamination. And to even see light from a practical like this, a small lamp, to see that show up on a white countertop among an otherwise brightly lit scene, you pretty much have to be using a key light that isn't that bright, aka a window. As soon as you start bringing in a flash, it's going to be overpowering these practicals to a level that you'll never really notice it. So this one, I am pretty much down to say this is actually natural light. If anything, maybe there's a very, very faint fill off to the right to just kind of bring in some of these shadows. But if you're going to do that, you might need to put some ND filter on it or do something else to kind of keep it from overpowering the natural light. Finally, this image, this lovely group shot, I've got to come out of the gate right now and say the group posing on this is fabulous. If you want to see what I'm getting at, I have a whole video on group posing. But just off the top of my head, I love the way she has grouped this large group into smaller subgroups. We have just a 1, we have a 3, and we have a 2. Kind of just these little clumps that kind of help categorize people in your head and help keep it from being too monotonous. Most of their heads are on different levels, which also helps break up the monotony of a group shot. Everyone looks good. It's just a great job posing all around. And then we bring in the light, which is also very well done. We have this beautiful slatted sunlight. I want to talk first about how I know this is actual sunlight versus a flash, where, in this shot here, I was pretty sure this is a flash, but here this sunlight feels very real. First things first, I'm noticing the background is very bright, almost blown out in some places, which once again, that's very good for helping maintain naturalism in the scene. But the big key for me is, you see these shadows here? These lines each slat is casting from the sun? If you look at the top one and the bottom one, every one of these slat lines is in perfect parallel with each other. Because how far the sun is, the distance in angle between this and this is barely there. However, if you were to bring in your own flash for this, in order to get these all together, you'd have to have it almost like a mile away. If you brought in your own flash and somehow got it on a stand this tall and blasted it through the window, you'd probably notice that this line was going this way and this line was going straight down, just because of the angle of incidence between your light source and these slats. So I already know that Mary Beth here is using direct sunlight. And that's very smart. Direct sunlight can be very unpredictable and very natural. And you get these really nice slashes of light in unpredictable places that kind of just adds this natural feel, but also exciting and a little bit crunchy. However, you start looking at these people's faces, they're looking very lit. They're looking very beautiful, very soft. Natural light just doesn't give a shadow that pure and consistent from top to bottom. Same here, same here. Every one of these. And this is an interesting one. This guy's head is interesting because you can see where the natural light ends and where the strobe begins. So to achieve this look, you would actually you would shoot first without any strobe. You would get it to the point where most of these people have a fair amount of light on them. The highlights were a little bit blown, but not to a point where you can't deal with it. And then you would bring in your strobe. You would bring in a big octa off to the right here, and you would just slowly bring it up, stop by stop, power level by power level, until you found a place where these two kinds of light were interfacing in a way that you liked. They weren't too lit. It didn't look like they were in a studio with a fake background behind them. You keep this just bright enough to feel like it's real, but also you have enough light on them that they look flattered and beautiful and ready to take on the world. So with those initial notes, let's move on to my home studio where I can kind of demonstrate this for you. Building from ambient only and adding a key light and adjusting both that light and how much ambient is coming in and seeing where that trade-off can happen. So as you can see, I've set up my living room in the early morning when I happen to get a nice beam of sunlight through the windows. It's blowing out here in the video, but I'll expose properly in the actual photo. I chose this moment for its similarity to Mary Beth's third photo, the group shot in front of the windows with the hard-edged light. I wanted to show how you can use harsh natural light as an element in an otherwise lit portrait. So here I am setting up a light. It's the only light I'm using in this particular instance. In order to get a nice, soft, natural, large-looking source, instead of using a large softbox or an octabank, which I just don't think would fit into this space in a natural way, I'm bouncing it into my white kitchen, which you can't see here, but just take my word for it. There's a small white kitchen that should bounce the light in a nice, natural, but large and flattering way. So here I am pointing the light directly into that kitchen. So first things first, this is the shot without any exterior light at all. I've exposed so that nothing in the shot is actually blown out, but everything else is kind of in shadow. So here I am turning the light on. I believe it's at about quarter power. And there's my first test shot. Already looking pretty good. You get a pretty good sense that this has probably been lit, but it still looks vaguely natural. And we're getting that nice hard highlight from the natural light. We're getting those nice shadows through the windows, through that Monstera plant, all that good stuff. The next thing I want to do is walk you through a step up of light, starting from just the base and adding a different amount of fill every shot. This is just the base, turning it on at the bottom. That's at 1/32. That's 1/16. 1/8. 1/4. 1/2. And just for good measure, full. And so you see you get a very different vibe in each of these shots. Full is perhaps the most flattering, but it's by far the least natural looking. So it really comes down to your taste. Where do you draw the line between natural looking and flattering? The other thing I wanted to talk about was the way shutter speed can change the look of your ambient. So the following photos are all going to have the same flash power, but with different shutter speeds. Top one, 1/160th for a base. Here I've opened to 1/50th. And you see how the sky is starting to blow out, and it's actually looking a lot more natural. It's a different balance. Highlights on my head are starting to blow out, but that's kind of natural to the eye. And here's kind of the other extreme. I went all the way down to 1/200th of a second, and I went down on my ISO by a full stop, and then countered that by changing the light back up a little. So it's the same strobe intensity, a very different amount of ambient getting through. I very much prefer the natural look, in this scenario at least. That's it for today. If you enjoyed what you saw and you want to discuss it a little bit more, I do have a Patreon with a Discord. I'm always in there and open for questions. And of course, if you have any time or money or energy to spare, I would very much like it if you gave your support to the Black Lives Matter movement. Find yourself an organization you trust and believe in. I'm partial to Justice for Breonna Taylor. This is their site. We have a lot of work to do. Thanks. Till next time. Stay safe, stay sane. Wear a mask at the protests. Bye.